Morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to welcome Dave Crawford this morning. Dave has studied agriculture and worked as a farm manager originally, but got drawn into the retirement fund industry in 1977. He worked for a year at the Southern Trident Building Society and then joined Legal and General Volkskas in 1980 and worked in the sales and technical training and strategic planning until it was merged with Momentum in 1989. He was involved in retirement fund member education and communication since 1989 as the owner of Planning Retirement, a consultancy that provides retirement fund member education service to about 20 of the top 40 companies. Planning Retirement is not a financial services provider, but functions only as a financial educator. He pioneered the concept of retirement benefits counseling, being done by people other than financial intermediaries at companies such as Anglo American and AECI. He also developed the concept of dynamic synthesis in financial modeling. He is a trustee of Multi-Elect Retirement Funds at the moment and currently the chair of the Institute of Retirement Funds Africa. Dave is extremely qualified to talk to us about this important aspect of our lives, planning our finances for retirement. Dave, thank you very much for speaking to us, and we look forward to your expertise and your presentation this morning.
Right. Good morning, everyone. I just want to go through this very quickly. What I did from being retrenched was, in fact, to teach retirement fund members how to improve their prospects. I do model and help older people, and I just thought it would be instructive for you to see that I have worked with some pretty substantial operations. And we basically built a new discipline out of helping people understand this sort of stuff better, because the whole system is built on well-qualified financial advisors advising people. But I believe individuals do not know enough and are not taught enough. And it's quite difficult to find a way of learning how this works. So I'm going to talk to you this morning about annuities and what the issues I'm going to cover. Annuities are often confused with retirement annuities, and I'd like to address that in a moment. I'd like to talk about the issues here. For one is discretionary sources of income. Two is compulsory sources and the difference between the two. Then what is known as the annuity puzzle. And the two main annuity types and hybrids. I understand many of you may already have retired and have made your choices. Still doesn't hurt to know more about it. The significance of guarantees, the issues of conversion, within which I will address a particular tax issue, and then questions. So let me get straight to it with the definition of an annuity, which is a financial instrument into which mostly retirement fund money is invested to provide a regular income. Many people talk about my annuity and they mean their retirement annuity, but in fact, an annuity per se is an income paid annually to someone as a result of a lump sum being invested. You will even find them mentioned in Pride and Prejudice of all with Jane Austen. So it's a pretty common fact. Now, I was a bit at a loss as to how to start and make this kind of interesting and not just a recital of facts. And I was looking in the Daily Maverick and I saw this letter. This chap is 73 years old and his wife is 66. They need 30,000 Rand a month and it must increase by 5% a year. Their only saving, their only capital is a living annuity worth 5 million, which has produced an annual investment return of 4%, which is not very hopeful. While we are still in the safe drawdown zone, we are using up some of our capital each month. And according to my calculations, we'll hit the maximum, which is 17.5% drawdown level in 8 years. What can we do? Just to go back quickly, I'm sure most of you have heard of living annuities at this age, certainly. A living annuity is just a pension product that is managed by the individual. An advisor may give advice, but the individual takes responsibility for it, and he or she may draw an income as a percentage of the capital, starting at 2.5% and ending at 17.5%. And there are terms like safe withdrawal zone and so on, which drawdown zone, which I'd like to explain a little further on. And what this chap is saying, that he's going to hit a point where he's drawing the absolute maximum, which in effect means that his capital can't grow and he can't increase his pension in about 8 years' time, which is quite a problem. At 73, being 74 myself, I feel quite close to the bone. So they want 30,000 every month. And it must be after tax, and it must increase annually by 5%. Very few people take tax into account when they look at the budget. This means they've got to take, call it 36,500 a month before tax from now, which means they are drawing nearly 9% of their capital every year. But that's not all. With a typical product like this, there is an investment management fee, which is also 2.5% of capital. It might be as low as 1.8. I've seen them as high as 4. Administration charges, roughly 0.3%. That's not too fatal. And advice fees are 0.86%, also of the capital. That means they're not drawing 8.75%, which is still very high. They're drawing almost 12.5% of that 5 million every month, every year. Sorry, excuse me. If they can earn those investment returns, then, in other words, the 12.4, that means that at the end of each year, they will have the same amount of capital they started with. So the capital won't rise, but at least it will stay level. But it's unlikely even to reach that because they are only earning 4% now. In other words, the capital is only growing by 4% in the year and they're drawing 12.4. So he's done a sensible calculation, a nice calculation. I did the same calc and I got the same answer. I was actually quite surprised. So it is a problem. And he believes that they will, I've said here at the rough, that they will hit the skids after 8 years from now. What that means is that the income will start to decrease after 8 years from now. Now, it may not be such a problem for a 73-year-old, but it's certainly going to be a problem for his wife of 66. So, I'd like to talk a little bit about the fees, because this is an aspect that people don't often pay much attention to. So we have the investment manager charges a percentage of the capital, the advisor charges a percentage of the capital, and the administrator charges a percentage of the capital. And that's where I've got the 12.4% withdrawn. The other charges that I have never seen mentioned are brokerage charges. There's an investor protection levy, straight with the electronic share system, the discretionary fund manager fees, if applicable, and of course, there are additional charges which are not necessarily included in the administration. If you can do it for 1.2 and your platform fee or your administration fee is 0.3%, and your advice fee is 0.5%, that's already a total of 2, which has got to be added to whatever you draw out. And some of the retail funds have performance fees, which mean if they earn above a certain amount, and they usually set it themselves, it's going to cost you quite a lot of money. And you do need to know and understand these things. I hope it's not too totally boring, but it's problematic. Why do they matter so much? Well, your fees do tend to push up the total amount of investment return that is needed. And when that becomes high, the investment portfolios tend to need to have more risk investment, more shares, to get a better result, obviously over the long term, but to get a better result. So the risk retirements are raised with this performance hurdle. Costs compound, just like returns compound, and the whole trick is that your returns should grow faster than your fees grow. And the expected annual costs of 2% is very rare. And in South Africa, it's a worthy achievement, but mostly it'll be in the region of 3% or more, and that is expensive. And one of the problems we have is that some of the better known managers who've branded themselves better charge more because they believe, or you believe, or most people believe, they're paying for more skills. The statistical work that is done indicates that with the active managers, there's not a huge amount of difference between them in what they do, which then means that higher fees mean less for the investor. So you've got to be a little careful of it. If you have an advisor, it's a good question issue to raise with him or her and see what can be done. So what can be done with the living annuity for these people to improve them? Well, the first thing they can do is reduce their pension. That clearly they do not wish to do. Second thing is to reduce their costs. This is hold on to this living annuity. The third is they can make changes to their investment portfolio. And the final thing they can do is to consider changing to a guaranteed life annuity. Now, I went a little further and I had a look at what could be done. And I wanted to have a look at the guaranteed pensions just so that people understand what I'm talking about. A guaranteed pension guarantee, which is available from any one of the major life companies, a guarantee to pay pensions until the last member of a couple dies. The pension's guaranteed never to reduce. Every time there is an annual increase, the level of the guaranteed pension rises, and you can arrange it so that the pension does not decrease if the pensioner dies first. And just to make that absolutely clear, at the time of retirement, if a guy, and I mean a guy could be a woman just as much, retires, then from a pension fund, he or she must invest in the pension, and their spouse will then be the what do you call it, the dependent, if you like. And if the pensioner does die, then the question of how does the pension continue? Because in some instances, when the pensioner dies, the pension ceases. Hopefully, that's not common anymore. And then finally, these pensions cease only when the last one dies. And I've put at the bottom the Wet van Transvaal. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, but basically, if you are on a guaranteed pension and you live to be 150, which of course is unlikely, they will be, big companies, whichever one you are contracted with, will have to pay you. And where I come from, the Wet van Transvaal means cut and betaal. Okay, so that's a guarantee. That's a lot of safety in that. How do these guaranteed products get increases? Well, there are three different ways. The first way, which is called profit annuities, any increases are based on the investment performance of the underlying assets or investments per se. So if they have very good growth over time, then the increases will be nice. But the increases, remember, are like steps. They keep going up and they don't come down once they've been conferred or granted. We then have what is the most common, which is called a non-profit. And this is where you might choose a fixed percentage by which your pension rises every year. All the other features, by the way, can be the same. So, and that is the add a spouse, pension doesn't decrease when the pensioner dies, that's it. So if you chose a 5% annual increase, you could actually work out, depending on your style, either using a cigarette box or a calculator, what your pension would be in 25 years' time if you're still around to receive it, because the fixed percent will continue. Many people choose the zero increase pension, which means you start with quite a high pension, but of course there are no annual increases. And this is, I believe, the time when you start to learn about the realities of inflation. This is the group I deal with mostly, people who haven't, who've taken the big annuity because they thought it was great, and now they can't get an increase, and now they believe they've been cheated. and they want to take the law into their own hands, but they have a contract and they just didn't really understand it. By the way, to make my position absolutely clear, I am a certified financial planner by profession. I belong to the Financial Planning Institute, but I'm not registered to sell life insurance, to sell any of these products, and I don't sell. What I do is I try to help people understand the options that they can take. I still encourage them, once they understand clearly, to consider using a financial advisor who will take them through the legal processes that are required before they sign. Then we have that's called a non-profit annuity because their increase does not depend upon the investment products. The second type of non-profit annuity is where the annual increase is based on the consumer price index, which is a very expensive annuity. When I say expensive, I mean that you get less pension for your investment. So with a CPI pension, from my experience, I don't know if it's exactly the same all the time, but the pension you start off with is probably about 30% less than the with profits pension and about that much less than a fixed percentage increase pension where 5% is chosen. Okay? Anyway, so now I wrote to an insurance house to see what they could do for the 5 million for this man and his wife. Okay? And with these quotes, I asked them how much pension they would start with if the pension were to continue in full if the pensioner died first. I have a sort of personal equity problem with pensions being reduced dramatically on the death of the pensioner. You know, because it suddenly changes a great deal. Can be done, but I don't think many people understand the real implications of that. So a with profits pension, which we mentioned earlier, which has a lot of shares in it, which means that it will grow, it should grow better over the long term, but it starts a bit lower. They could get 24,400 a month. This is after tax. If they take one which is invested in bonds, mainly in interest-bearing security, it's a bit better. If they take the 5% per annum increase job, this includes both of them, they could have roughly 26,700 pounds. Now that would continue until the death of the last dying. Okay? And finally, if we suggested the 5% per annum pension increase, and we arrange that the pension drops to half, the pensioner dies first, then they can get an after-tax monthly pension of 28, call it 29,000, which I reckon is pretty decent, pretty close to what they want. I understand it's not perfect, but it's a possibility. And that opens quite a big door, I think, with all of this. And that is that there is an option for people in living annuities to change to something which offers guarantees at a later stage in life. Okay? Let me now get back to the menu program. And now, in the pension fund industry and the life insurance industry and investment industry, we talk about discretionary sources of income and compulsory sources. A discretionary source of income would be money from any financial asset except a retirement fund. However, if you withdrew cash from a retirement fund, and I am aware that quite a few people have got retirement annuities, not necessarily in the group I'm talking to, but generally held on to their retirement annuities. And it may be a question of taking some of the cash out of that, because you are entitled to take up to 1/3 in cash out of a retirement annuity. Or if you've deferred your pension, you take 1/3 in cash. Once that money has been taken and the tax has been paid, it becomes a discretionary source of income. And you can invest that in anything you like. I do want to warn you that if you consider putting it on the 5th horse from the 5th race at Turpentine on Saturday or Kenilworth, sorry, I haven't quite moved on here yet. I can only offer you one suggestion. Putting it on the 5th horse in the 5th race is the high probability that it comes 5th. Okay? But you can put it into interest, dividends, buy property that earns you rent, invest in government stock. I noticed quite a lot of reluctance to invest in Eskom bonds, but they are available as a retail investment. And that interest, that income is taxable the way it would normally be. So interest, the first, it was 23,000 something, 23,800 of interest is now tax deductible, plus I forget, but as you get older, the amounts rise. Dividends, you pay 20% tax at source. Rent, you taxed as income after maintenance. I'm sure many of you know this better than I do. And that's just the way it goes. Okay? But there are very few guarantees involved in that sort of investment. Now, compulsory money comes from a number of sources. And basically, it's from anything that looks or feels or smells like a pension, a provident fund. And by the way, just as a matter of interest, provident funds are classed as pension funds in terms of the Pension Funds Act, although they are differentiated. So if you have money in a pension fund or a preservation pension fund, or a provident fund or a preservation provident fund, or a retirement annuity fund, that money may all be used to put into a pension, and you will not pay tax on the transfer. So the money you move across into a compulsory purchase pension, so it's called, there's no tax on that transfer. So there isn't much of a transition cost, although patently there's going to be some costs. For example, if an advisor helps you do it, there is commission. And if you move it into a living annuity, there will be fees that are paid literally every month as you go along. Okay? A preservation pension fund, I just want to mention, because it's not everybody understands or has heard of one. There was a time prior to 2017 when, if you reached retirement age, you were forced to, sorry, not retirement age, if you resigned from a pension fund or provident fund, you had to either take the benefit in cash or you could invest it in a retirement annuity, or you could put it into a provident fund or pension fund called a preservation pension fund. So let us assume you're a provident, belongs to a provident fund, which has an interesting characteristic which is now changing, that at retirement you can take the whole lot out in cash. You may well have to pay tax, but you can take it as a lump sum. Whereas with a pension, you can only take a third of the cash and the balance must be used to invest in the pension. So now you're halfway along the road to retirement. You've resigned from your employer, where there was a provident fund. You now need to find a place to put this money. If you put it into a retirement annuity or a pension fund, you have turned it into pension money. And in fact, there used to be some quite a lot of feeling about this. So that's where these came from. They were sold as retail products, and retail products are not cheap, nor are retirement annuities. Now, from 2017, you may, or people who belong to pension funds, if they resign, may leave their money in the same fund if they want to, or if they belong to a provident fund, they may leave it in the same fund. They can also put it in a retirement annuity fund, and even if they wish to, even if they have reached retirement age now and they don't wish to retire, they can leave their money in a particular fund. There's quite a lot of flexibility in how and when you retire and make the retirement transaction. It's a tax transaction. You have to know, revenue have to be party to the transaction, even though you may well not have to pay tax. Okay, so that's the compulsory sources, but it means that you cannot take money that you have, that you've saved up, and put it into, for example, a guaranteed pension fund, which may have some advantages for people who are worried about their ability to manage money, because that income is guaranteed into later life. I mean, until a person dies. Now that can be done, but there's a trick to it, and it can have a tax benefit. It may not, but it mostly has a tax benefit. People who choose to go that way. And I understand how fiercely independent everybody is and wants to be with their money. But sometimes there comes a time when you want to nail your source of income down, and you want to know that you've got either a reasonable chance or a guarantee of an annual increase, and you know that particularly if you die, that your spouse is not going to have a problem, and it doesn't matter whether your spouse, what your spouse is generally, not going to have a problem managing money into old age, particularly if they are unable to do that. The annuity puzzle, which the Americans talk about a lot, is, does a pensioner receive more money by investing in a life pension, that's a guaranteed pension, or a lump sum? Now, in this country, the closest thing we have to this is a provident fund and taking a cash lump sum. And anecdotal evidence, I don't believe there's any tightly statistical, shows that the average provident fund amount lasts 4 to 5 years, whereas a pension, after being withdrawn, whereas a pension obviously must last. And a very interesting statistic from one of the biggest pension funds in the country, they have, what happens is they pay a pension to a retired employee and spouse, let's say. And when the retired employee and spouse die, the pension fund calculates how much they have actually paid them in rand. If it is less than the amount that was originally invested to get the pension in the first place, that credit balance is invested in the deceased estate of the one who dies last. Okay, now that, not to tell you about it, because I don't think anybody here can have to do much of that. But what's important about it is the fund tells me that they have never had a credit balance for anybody who has been on pension for longer than about 9 years. In other words, they use up the money in 9 to 10 years. The fact that they've guaranteed that the pension will be paid for life is a completely different issue. That is managed actuarially with all the different fund members and so on. So, and if you purchase a life pension, which you can do from a life insurance company, I suggest sticking to the big four, which is Sunlight Mutual, Metropolitan, and Liberty, because they have very, very substantial capital bases. They can give you that guarantee that it will be paid for that. Right? So if your money lasts 4 years, that's not as good as 10, but in fact, a guaranteed pension lasts for a lifetime. So the question is, how long will you live? And that's something none of us know. At least I don't think so. When people look at pensions or annuities, they look at a couple of things, how to choose. They look at the adequacy of their pension. In other words, have I got enough? Can I get a good enough pension out of this capital to supply me with my needs? That's a quite important issue. What are the chances, secondly, of this pension keeping pace with inflation? How is it linked to inflation? Is it linked to inflation? Because inflation may be poor. There may be a poor direct linkage to inflation, but the product may be sustainable, which is why the items are fairly cyclical. Everyone worries about a legacy. What happens if the two of us die early on before we have received sufficient pension to have made it worthwhile? It's a mental calculation that people do. And having told you about what happens with that pension fund, it works out that they've never had a case, and they're pretty old. They've never had a case of a pension lasting for more than just over 9 years. You understand that the legacy is is a little more difficult to believe it is. Sustainability is, can you get enough investment return to keep the thing alive? And that hinges upon how much you draw out as a pension. And what we see is that people who draw little from these funds do very, very well. This is the living annuity. If you don't draw too much, it has got what I suppose one might call legs. Yeah? What certainty do you have? And this is the guarantees, and you have to look at both sides for that. The guaranteed annuities clearly have a lot of guarantees. but in some instances they may conflict, for example, with the legacy issue. May conflict with adequacy. And of course, what is it invested in? How does that benefit me? And where do I go? That's quite a big deal to look at all this stuff. And for many people, they see it as a fairly simple issue. It is, but you need to be aware of the consideration. Now, just retirement, supply retirements, and they gave a very nice presentation. I've used a few of their slides. And I think you understand that everybody wants products that are simple in this particular area. And many people want products that are flexible, that can change to suit their changing needs. I'm not so sure that that's as big a requirement as people think it is, because you don't want to have to chop and change, particularly as you get older. And then value for money. Do you want good value for money? And I'm not sure that that's an easy thing to look at. And I'll tell you why. If you take a pension, a guaranteed pension, where you have a guaranteed annual increase, if you take a 1% increase, you will get considerably more money than if you took a pension where you have a 6% per annum annual increase. You get a much bigger pension for a lower increase. So now, if you don't understand this, or if it's not made absolutely clear to you, you may not quite get what you want in the long run, and the consequences may be problematic. There's another nasty little problem that they seem to go on top of, where people would take a pension that did not include their spouse. Now, men are supposed to live to around about 80, 81, and women 4 years longer. So when you look at a pension, guaranteed pension for a lady, for a gentleman, he gets a very good rate. Then you add his spouse, and the pension drops considerably because the company believes, particularly if there's a big age gap, because the insurance company have to take into account that they may be keeping the wife in pension for many years longer. And I had a case where a chap divorced his wife, married his secretary, and she happened to be 23 at the time of retirement. And the pension he was offered was very, very little, and he got quite upset about it and went to see the pension fund manager. And the pension fund manager said, "So you've got to understand, we have taken on your wife as a pensioner as well, and she, at 23, is going to live for a very long time, so we have to reserve the money." Okay. Now, when we look at these things, we need to look at risk and express a little differently. What we say is a living annuity, for example, is 100% self-insured. You take full risk of living too long. If you live past the money, that's it. Inflation risk, you can deal with, and that will depend upon the investments you make. Investment risk will be volatile because you are exposed to the market. I have some good news in that area, where one of the big life companies, and I'm sure they will make a production of it soon, they have come up with what they call a smooth bonus portfolio, where you invest once and they manage it for you to try to get what they call an absolute return, so that you know what you're getting into. Product complexity, products complex. Complex from the point of view of a member, and I hope I've made that reasonably clear. Product flexibility, product is very, very flexible. Because you can start with a 2.5% pension, and you can go up as high as a 17.5% pension. And people often say to me, who would want to use a 17.5? Well, we see it all the time. People who immigrate, who then draw the money out of the country effectively at 17.5%. And that takes most of the money out in 5 or 6 years. And the balance is a trickle, which is fine, but they have got a substantial amount out. Sadly, tax makes that fairly awkward. The product value for money, I can't really comment on. They believe it's reasonable, but it means you've got to look at your costs. You've got to make that judgment. Now, Deloitte, who I worked with for some years, I was employed by them, but I did consulting with them. When this thing was launched in 1989, one of their partners, tax partners, said to me that this is a product for the well-endowed and the well-informed. And I think that describes it perfectly. When we look at the slang here, the new generation of profits pension annuity, that's the guaranteed pension, where the increases depend entirely upon your investment returns, the underlying investment returns. If we look at the longevity risk, it is fully insured. As long as you live or your spouse lives, whoever lives the longest, they will receive a pension. Inflation linked, it's possible to get, could be fixed. Your investment risk is smooth because you have a group of trustees who decide on the relationship between the investment returns and the bonuses or the escalations, the increases that the pension is going to receive. The product is very complex internally, but it is relatively simple for people to understand because you know you're going to get an increase based on this. The pension is going to last for so long, all of it, and that will not change. Product flexibility, there is no flexibility. You get what you get. And the product value for money actually appears to be high because you don't see that you have costs. I believe that the costs are built in. I know the costs are built in. I mean, nobody does anything for nothing. But what makes this particularly important is that the pension is guaranteed nevertheless. And every year, your increase pushes it up. So although the costs may be there, you don't have to worry about them on a short-term basis. And anyway, you can't, there's not much you can do about them because they're built into the system. Now, there's a new product out where you can blend the two together. Where you can put 60% in a living annuity and 40% in the guaranteed or vice versa. And all this is saying is that the level of insurance depends upon the mixture. Inflation risk is the same as with all the others. The volatility, depends upon that mixture. Because if you've got 60% of your pension that will never decrease and 40% that will be volatile, you'll have less volatility than 100% of the pension that could be volatile, or the investment returns could be volatile. Product complexity, fairly complex. Flexibility, pretty flexible. And I think that the value for money, you have to look at it at the time. But the ideal is that you get into this thing with 90% in a living annuity and an investment product where you choose your level of income, 10% of guarantee, and then exactly like a radio engineer, you move the slide across as you get older. So probably by the time you get to 90, 80 to go, you've got a pension that is 80% in a guaranteed pension and 20% in a flexible product that has a fair amount of risk. Okay. Now, I have done it. We've arranged it where people who have discretionary capital could move their money into a guaranteed pension or into a living annuity. And the way they do it is they make a lump sum transfer to a retirement annuity, which you can do at any time. And then the retirement annuity a month later says, right, here we are, this is now compulsory money, let's choose a pension. Not difficult to do. However, when you contribute money to a retirement annuity, you're supposed to get tax relief on the contribution. And the limits at the moment are 27.5% of your, basically your income, remuneration, can be tax deductible. But if you put a very big lump sum in there, unlikely you're going to get all that tax relief. So Section 10C2 of the Income Tax Act tells us that if you have a disallowed contribution to a retirement annuity, At the time that you convert from the pension product to the retirement annuity to the annuity itself, you may either increase your tax-free amount at that time, or you can offset that tax-free credit against annuity income. And we did a thing arranged it. I got an advisor to do the work. But we set it up, checked it, where a man was retiring with 4 million. And his boss wanted to give him another 1 million as a cash value of his partnership share in an engineering firm, but refused to give it to him because the guy was a prodigal. He said, if I give him the money, his children will have it off him in about 20 seconds. So what we did was we made an additional contribution to his pension. So now he had 5 million in the pension fund. The pension he got was something like 26,000 a month. And it meant that because he had this credit of nearly 1 million with the receiver, he won't pay tax for at least the first 3.5 years, because his pension comes through that way. So you can make that conversion if you choose. If you wish to move a living annuity to a guaranteed pension or guaranteed annuity, you may do that. Quite a simple transaction. However, a financial advisor who will do that is not allowed to charge a commission. So he or she will want a substantial fee for doing that, which is quite interesting, because none of us really understand the price we pay for these products. I mean, I'm same as anybody else. I have my own investment products and things. But you can do it. Yeah? And then you are also able to move a living annuity from one administrator to another, which would mean possibly changing your investment portfolios and things at that same time. You certainly may do it. You're permitted to do it. But again, the view of the fiscus is that, or rather the view of the, what's it called, the Financial Sector Control Authority, is that you have already paid commissions on the thing, so you shouldn't be required to pay double, and so you go down the line. There is a certain amount of reluctance on the part of advisors to move a living annuity to a guaranteed annuity, because the living provides them with income on a perpetual basis, as long as the annuity survives. But you'll find the decent ones won't have a problem if it's to suit your circumstances better. Living annuity to living annuity, that would be because you're not necessarily satisfied with the with the way you're being treated, or the costs or something of that nature. Or there may be an investment portfolio that you don't particularly want where you are, and there may be something that's a lot better than the UK. There is a cost to this, because you have to disinvest and reinvest, and that costs money. And if the portfolio is not exactly similar, you may get a different configuration of investment, which might make things also a little bit different. Okay? Section 10C2, I've just put it for you. And by the way, these, I have spoken to Gert. This slide presentation, I'm perfectly happy to put onto a PDF, and I'll send it to him, and then he can give it to anybody who particularly wants it, if they'd like it. But as a PDF. Don't print it out the way I do it, because the black background seems printer thing. But I just find that people like the black background of the courses that I run. So there should be exempt from normal tax in respect of the aggregate of compulsory annuities payable to a person, an amount equal to so much of the person's own contribution to any pension fund, provident fund, and retirement annuity fund that did not rank for a deduction against the person's income in terms of Section 11K or N, as has not previously been allowed to the person as a deduction in the second schedule. Okay? So, or it can, or exempted from normal tax in this section, and that's in respect for anywhere of the system. So there's 10C2, which you can have a run at. Not a lot of I won't say not a lot, but a number of tax practitioners I've run into actually didn't know about it. And so they took it up with revenue, and revenue said, no, it's correct. Accordingly, any disallowed contributions that was not previously wrapped for deduction, in terms of Section 11K or 11N of the Income Tax Act may be set off against any income earned from compulsory annuities. Hence my focus on the use of the term compulsory annuity. Now, I hope I haven't blinded you completely with all this information, but I want to end now with this slide, which is where we compare the two, just so that you can see. And here we have the pension level guaranteed on a living annuity. No, it's not. On a conventional pension, it is a guaranteed pension. It is. Pension guaranteed to be paid for life, living annuity, it's not. You have to manage it. But if you know how to do it, and if you get it right, or you have an advisor who does know how to do it properly, and you're not taking too much, it's a brilliant, brilliant. Conventional pension, guaranteed for life. Investment risk is carried by the pensioner in full on the living annuity, only in part on the conventional. And that part is the annual increase from year to year. But if you miss an increase 1 year due to bad conditions, the following year, there is an increase. That will then increase the pension once again, and the compounding will continue. Flexible pension withdrawals, that is really where the living annuity comes into account. Yes. Conventional annuity, forget it. You pay, they give you so much per month, and that's it. And they give you increases, and that's the size of it. And you cannot, at the moment, as far as I know, it's not easy to have a CPI-linked living annuity, if at all possible. Whereas with a conventional pension, it is one of the options for doing that. And there we are. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave. What do you think of the implications for this new law that they're discussing, allowing people to withdraw from their pension fund?
You're talking about to make a bigger withdrawal from a living annuity, and it will only come in next year, 2022, to allow you to use some of your pension money to help you because of losses during the COVID problems, because of shutdown. Look, I think if you need the money, you need the money. With the deepest of respect, and I don't know what the taxation implications are yet, because they haven't been finalised. The Act has not been finalised, but it just means that you can reach out and get a bit of cash to do it if you absolutely need to.
No.
Now we saw with pension funds, they were permitted to take a holiday from making contributions as a result of COVID. I'm a trustee on 5 funds, or they're all part of an umbrella thing. And we didn't have very many people who came in with that. Everybody just tried, with the reductions. But I think as you're getting towards, as one is getting a bit older, there is slightly less risk, slightly. And that's because if you have a living annuity and you do take something out of it, you're still in a position where you can take the diminished amount and take it and convert it to a guaranteed pension where you will get a much higher annuity rate. Now, I have a particular case in Hermanus of a lady who came to see me with the problem. And she was very worried because her income, she was only getting about 5 or 6% on her money. And so she was 81. So we took it to 2 of the big suppliers, and they said, we can give her 14% on that same capital because she's 81 and they don't expect her to live that long. Well, knowing her and knowing her feelings about life insurance companies, I think she's likely to become the oldest inhabitant at about 140. But the fact remains that there are always options. And if your need is absolutely beyond, reason, I mean, what do you do? But the Treasury is still going to tinker with it, and I think it's not going to be quite as simple as everything.
Well, I'm on a government pension, and I think we've been told, not that I want to, that it wouldn't be possible. I just worry about someone in their 40s withdrawing from a pension fund and then struggling as a 70-year-old because they don't have enough.
Sadly, it's the imperative of the present. I just watched, to get myself in the mood this morning, I watched an American film called Broken Egg, which I can send the link if anybody wants to have a look at it. And they've got an interesting problem. The average saving for working American subject is about $10,000. which 1.4 million. And so it's a gigantic problem everywhere, but they interview a lot of people on this film, and everybody says, look, we have this imperative of living today, and the future is going to have to look like itself. And what we see is that people should be gearing themselves to live to 100 and looking at it from that point of view. I mean, I was retrenched when I was 42, and I created a new job for myself, and I'm still going. I was petrified after leaving Johannesburg with a lockup. My business had ceased completely. I came down here and went, and I'm still sitting with a pension that I haven't touched because I want to, when I take it, I want to know that how would you put it, on the last lap, as it were. Your point is quite right. People will touch it. Some will, some won't. And of course, some people resign to get at the money, which they can do today. For most pensions, can't from your fund because of the limits on what you've got. If you've resigned early, because they withheld some of the contributions. It's a big worry. It's a huge.
Any other questions?
Do you think there's a possibility that the government is going to impose prescribed investments on pension funds, which will have an impact on their ability to fund their payment obligations?
Well, now that's quite interesting because the pension funds fall into two classes. The one is the active fund where people are contributing, and the other is the retired fund where people are withdrawing. And there is a separation. And what we may well, and there is quite a lot of argument going on in the background. But at the moment, I think people have agreed, generally speaking, there's agreement that this is not going to happen. Just as, this national savings scheme they're talking about again, with the 12% coming out, that came up, I think, in the early 2000s. And they decided to impose the Canadian scheme, which has 3 levels of pension. And it just wouldn't fly. And most of these things won't fly because you've got unemployment. The pension fund issues are dicey. I'll tell you where they might have a run is this vast amount of money that is stuck in unclaimed benefits. I don't know if you saw those figures the other day. We had something like 4.5 million people who have something like 4.5 billion billion rands worth tucked away in the unclaimed bonuses. That, I'm sorry to say, might look like what you could describe as low-hanging fruit. I think there's too much union activity. I think there's too much awareness now of that. And I think a lot of the Regulation 28 issues have been aired very widely. We had those restrictions during the but prior to the new government arrangements where a pension fund and a provident fund, which were two separate items, the provident fund is treated as a policy. The provident fund had to have 35% in approved bonds, and pension funds had to have 55% in approved bonds, which of course added to the funding requirements because people needed to put more money into a similar kind of pension because results were not stable. That was the theory, but in practice they did very well. So I don't know. I doubt if it will. First of all, I don't know that guys could organise very much anyway. And secondly, the insurance industry and the pension funds represent an enormously powerful, and that includes medical aids, by the way, represents an enormously powerful, large force of money, which if I was this government, I would want to keep as sweet as I possibly could. I would not go near them. But that's an opinion. I can't tell you.
Another question, Dave, you didn't say very much about estate duty. Are there some funds that are more of a hedge against estate duties than others?
Well, pension funds are exempt. For a long time, and I think it's still the case, people were putting sums of money into retirement annuities so that the income would just be paid out to people. And yes, they would pay income tax, but there would be no estate duty. It was quite a complicated sum to figure out if I take the lump sum or if I divert the money through a pension of some kind. The pensions per se are state duty exempt. However, if you take a lump sum out of a pension, pay the tax on it, then you will pay state duty on it, yes. But you're looking at income here, not capital per se. Now, when you, in the event of one's death with a living annuity, and there is a lump sum to be left to somebody, because a widow, for example, would have the choice of continuing to take the pension or to convert to a guaranteed pension or to take the money, pay the tax and go on. She would pay, at the time, they would pay tax in the deceased estate as though it was any other lump sum from a pension fund. And then it becomes eligible for state duty in the estate of the person who receives it, but only in the event of their death.
It's a complex world, Dave. Don't you think we should rather bet on the lotto?
I'm beginning to think that until I saw a piece of graffiti that said, what is it? The lotto is a tax on people who don't understand arithmetic. Of course, I am fascinated by crypto coins. They seem to be the most perfect fodder for con artists, but there has to be some substance there, and I think that will unload itself over time, and we may learn more about it. But I have a particular friend, a man called David Shapiro, who you may have heard of him. He was on the radio quite a lot, a well-known stockbroker. And David's point to me, because I said to him, shouldn't everybody be doing a little bit of this, a little bit of that? And he said, as soon as it's understandable, I said, I will talk to my clients. But he said, until then, I am letting them use their own discretion.
Dave, I mean, you made a very interesting point that, today, sadly, people live for the day. There's no long-term building a business or, saving. If I think back to my parents, I don't think they ever had an overdraft. And, and they raised 5 of us, and we were never short of anything, but they never, bought something unless they could go and pay cash for it. And very interesting to hear what you say about the States. I mean, I think if there's a broken country, that we should learn from, I mean, you don't want to see the unemployment and the lack of housing and the sheer desperation in a this first world country called the USA.
It's absolutely awful. What I will do is I'm going to send out the PDF of the presentation anyway, and then I'll send the link to that film called The Broken Egg, which discusses their issues. It's quite interesting to see, because I think we've actually, looking at that, I think we've actually done, at a certain level here, it's below that level, I think it just has been ignored completely, but from a certain level up, and the people who certainly operate with the ethic that you talked about, and the ethic that I was raised with, we've actually not done too badly at all.
Mm.
I think there's tweaking that needs to be and can be done to improve things, and I think people do sometimes get off on the wrong foot and want to make a few changes and so on. But I think by and large, we've done all right. Our problem that is coming is the fact that up until probably 85 or 86, just about everybody was on the same type of pension that Letitia is now did retire from, and that is a defined benefit pension fund. And what happened was in 1984, the industry, the life insurance industry, noticed that their sales of new business were not growing with inflation. They were actually going backwards. So they put a lot of pressure on to sell pensions. At that time, you worked for ISCOR or wherever you worked, and you knew your pension would just flow. After you retired, the pension would start. Anglo-American, everywhere. And a lot of pressure was put on people by the very consultants who said to them, look, these funds are expensive. We are unable to get the returns that we were hoping for. So you guys have got to put in more because you guaranteed the difference to make up to the promised pension. So people knew that they knew what the pension was. It was quite easy to read. And then, as I say, from then on, there was a concerted effort made by a number of consultancies to get the pension funds to move away from that so that individuals had to invest in their own pensions. And they also, at the same time, moved away from the guarantees. So it was called defined benefit initially, and the new one is defined contribution. So now, I put in money, my employer puts in money, and whatever's in the kitty at the time I retire, hey, that's it. And you go back to people who didn't understand risk, didn't understand almost any of the principles involved in this, keeping track. And when I was when I first joined the industry in 1977, I went on a course, and they told me then that 5% of the people who belong to retirement funds would have financial independence. And Forbes announced a year ago, I think it was, that that figure has now risen to a fantastic total of 6%. So, you know, it's just, it's a problem. Anyway, sorry, you probably noticed I'm a bit of a monomaniac. I apologize. I hope you found some of it interesting. And, you know, if anybody does want to ask me questions, I do not say. So I have no interest in trying to flog you anything, but I do have a lot of experience, including a couple of years in actuarial, to actually understand a lot of this.
Well, Dave, thank you for coming along this morning to share your insights, your experiences with us. It's a very complicated matter, this control of one's finances up to and during retirement. So it's wonderful that people like you are able to give advice and give guidance. And thank you for coming along this morning and sharing your insights with us. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.